Committee members, my name is John Harris Maurer, and I'm the Public Policy Director for Equality Florida, which is dedicated to securing full equality for Florida's LGBTQ community. We strongly oppose House Bill 1557 as written. Equality Florida has three primary contentions with this bill. First, the banning of certain schools, or say government employees, from discussing sexual orientation and gender identity, establishing a new basis for lawsuits against school districts that we believe will have a chilling effect on support for LGBTQ youth, and third, requiring school districts to rely on the Department of Education for trainings. As a threshold matter, it's important to note that Equality Florida broadly supports parental notification and involvement. And we've seen how Florida school board district meetings have recently become political battlegrounds, with students being called slurs like pedophile in meetings where they're trying to encourage adopting suicide and bullying prevention measures. That's why we're concerned about the bill's vague requirements for parental involvement and inclusion, along with a new cause of action. This creates a new avenue for more litigation against school districts, which in turn will discourage those districts from adopting LGBTQ supportive policies that unsupportive parents will be likely to sue over. We're also justifiably concerned about relying on the Department of Education for directing school district trainings. Just last month, the Department of Education removed its anti-bullying prevention resources from its websites because there were questions about its inclusion of LGBTQ protections. They did restore the anti-bullying resources only after stripping the LGBTQ references. Most critically, we are appalled by the bill's provision to ban schools from discussing sexual orientation and gender identity in primary grades. And we've said here today that encouraging is limited because it only means procedures or curriculum, but then we've also said that it doesn't include banning the teaching of LGBTQ history. So there's a lack of clarity clearly on what this bill is seeking to do. But what we do know is that LGBTQ people are a normal, healthy part of our society. We're parents, students, and teachers. We are your brothers and your sisters. Conversations about us aren't something dangerous that should be banned. That's deeply prejudicial, and it sends a terrible message to our young people, including LGBTQ young people or young people who have LGBTQ parents. There are a lot of issues that ought to be approached with care in how we respectfully talk about them with our children. Issues like religion, politics, weighty issues like death, the meaning of life. But this bill doesn't speak to any of those. It's only talking about sexual orientation and gender identity, and it's stigmatizing because of that. Sexual orientation and gender identity are about who we love and who we are. If you're worried about teaching students about sexual activities, then regulate that, but don't use this as a front to ban discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity. We already have statutes on age-appropriate sexual education, so this bill adds nothing to that. It's about finding a place to erase our existence and be able to not talk about us. How dare you support a bill like this and call yourself an ally of the LGBTQ community? You can't. You simply can't. We ask that you oppose this bill.
Rep. Fine, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you. I'm sort of perplexed by the conversation. So I have a 10-year-old, so he would fall into the primary grades. And why is it that you think that these conversations can't happen at home between myself and my son? I haven't had any, but maybe he has with his mom. I don't know. But why can't those conversations happen at home? Why do we have to fight? Why do you want to fight to keep the government being the one that's going to have these conversations with children as opposed to their parents?
You're recognized.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked the question. I hope you would have those conversations with your kid. There are plenty of LGBTQ folks, I'm sure, already in your children's lives, and they should know about those people and that they have relationships that are equally valuable to any other one that you might talk about. Nothing that we've said today is about prohibiting a parent from having that conversation with their kids. We would welcome and encourage that.
So,
Yes, sir, you're recognized.
Thank you. So given that nothing in this bill prevents a parent from having conversations with their children, because it's the parent's job to raise the children, not the government. Why is there a problem saying to the government, stay out of it, keep this between a child and their parents?
You're recognized.
Because respectfully, the purpose of the school system is to educate our young folks, and they should be able to learn about all topics, all sorts of people, the other folks who are in their classes and their families. This should be an acceptable topic just like any other issue. Race, religion, national origin. Why would we singly focus out sexual orientation and gender identity and say, no, that's something that young people can't learn about?
Representative LaMarca, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Chair. I'll ask the same question I asked the bill sponsor. Have you or your organization reached out to him to try to talk about the bill, make changes in the bill, make it better?
I've not had a chance to speak directly to the bill sponsor. We would certainly welcome that. I know I've had a chance to speak with a number of you on the committee. Very much appreciate the time that you've taken to think about these issues and learn a little bit more about the bill. Unfortunately, it did drop on the filing deadline, and we had fewer than 48 hours notice that it was on this committee agenda, but we look forward to a lot more conversations as it proceeds.
Representative Trabolsi, you're recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You keep referring to this bill as if we are only referring to LGBTQ children or conversations, but I don't see that language anywhere in the bill where it specifically mentions or relates to that specifically.
You're recognized.
And thank you. My apologies. I don't have the line number in front of me. I believe it's around 74, but that's where it specifically says school districts may not encourage discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity in primary grades or in any way that is not age appropriate. And again, that's the only place where you have a reference specifically to sexual orientation and gender identity, no other topics that we've talked about, issues like religion, national origin, anything else that a school may talk about. So that's why we feel like there is clearly an intentional focus on LGBTQ issues in this bill.
For a follow-up?
So it's also not talking about being heterosexual either, is it?
Well, interestingly, actually it does. Obviously, when we refer to sexual orientation and gender identity, that means whether you are LGBTQ, whether you're straight, whether you're transgender or cisgender. So that bill language is incredibly broad, and in fact, it says that now you can't talk in primary grades about anybody's sexual orientation or gender or identity. So you can't talk about family formation between an opposite sex couple. That seems incredibly broad and vague to me, or the fact that, somebody identifies as a man or a woman, even if that does align with their sex assigned at birth. We would certainly be open to amending language that addresses how incredibly broad that is.
Thank you.
Whip Andrade for a question.
Thank you, Chair. And along the same line of questioning, when I read this bill, my understanding is that if a school district, understanding that school districts aren't a monolith politically, and you have a broad range of political spectrums and worldviews, this would also prohibit a school district from adopting a policy and encouraging discussion saying that if you don't identify as cisgender, you have a mental illness, correct?
Correct.
So would if a school district ultimately adopted that kind of policy, encouraged those discussions, saying that identity unrelated to your biological gender is a mental illness, a parent of a child who opposes that viewpoint would be able to take that school district to court, correct?
You're recognized.
I think that there are existing recourse without this bill to address incredibly egregious situations like that.
Is there a direct one that you're aware of that a parent would be able to avail themselves of right now?
We already have a number of provisions in statute, many of which were looked at last session with the Parents' Bill of Rights, about how that curriculum adoption has opportunities for parental involvement, review, and challenge.
I guess the question I'm asking, though, is there a method to get a declaratory judgment, an injunctive relief, to stop the teaching that, if you don't identify as cisgender, you have a mental illness?
You're recognized.
I don't know about those legal mechanisms. Again, our concern is that we don't want to turn our schools into these political battlefields where we have school districts, school board members being worried about that sort of litigation in a way that chills what they think is in the best interest of students' learning.
Representative Escamani, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Chair. John Harris, what has the trend been the last 5 years when it comes to equity around LGBTQ plus Has it been mostly inclusive and then now all of a sudden we're rolling things back? Can you talk to the history of inclusion within our schools of LGBTQ plus issues and identity?
You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Sure. Florida school districts have come a long way, particularly, as you said, in about the last 5 years in improving cultural competency around LGBTQ issues, whether that is about students, about their parents, their families. So those things are moving in the right direction. And we've also seen some chilling effects already from things like the Parents' Bill of Rights last session, which, as many of you may remember, we heard many times from the bill sponsors that it wouldn't have certain effects. And yet, school districts are understandably concerned about new legal liabilities. And it is causing some of them to re-examine and roll back some of those protections already, which gives us serious concern.
Quickly, if you have a question on the bill. That last question wasn't really on the bill. We have a whole lot of people
Sounds good, Chair.
to testify.
Thank
So
you.
you're recognized if it's on the bill.
Thank you. I asked this question to the bill sponsor, but I want to ask it to you again. What are the concerns of unintended consequences for families where the parents are not supportive of LGBTQ plus identity?
You're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Broadly speaking, again, Equality Florida supports parental involvement, parental notification. Our concern is those cases where you have unsupportive parents. Really, our fear here is just that we may be chilling support that students may find at school when they don't have another place of safety.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next, we have January Littlejohn.